Hello. This video is about leucine. Does leucine and leucine alone drive muscle protein synthesis, or is insulin the main player, as some people claim? Let's take a look. Or leucine without insulin can't do it. No, there are a lot of different claims along those lines. So let's just take a look with a couple of studies and see what exactly is really happening out there. Let me just share. So this study here was in the Journal of Nutrition. Leucine supplementation of low protein meal increases skeletal muscle and visceral tissue protein synthesis in neonatal pigs by stimulating mTOR, pendant translation initiation factor. Okay, so here we're talking about mTOR complex 1 controls protein synthesis, just for those who want to get a bit of additional information. Let me just go through the abstract. Protein synthesis and eukaryotic initiation factor activation are increased in skeletal muscle of neonatal pigs parentally infused with amino acid. Leucine appears to be the most effective single amino acid to trigger these effects. To examine the response of enteral leucine supplementation, overnight food deprivation, 5-day-old pigs were fed at 0 and 60 minutes. Basically, they fasted them overnight, and basically the next morning they fed them one of 3 options: a low protein diet, a low protein supplemented with leucine, to equal leucine as in the high protein diet group. So the amount of leucine they put in there is equal. So very important. The high protein diet group was the third. And that could actually act as a control, because we know high protein is very important. It's quite clear in the literature out there that high protein will increase muscle protein synthesis. Now, what we're trying to determine is leucine the key player, or is basically just the amount of additional protein in there playing the role. Diets were isocaloric and equal in lactose. Another nice thing about it, they added sugar. In terms of milk, from skim milk, which is good because that will have an insulin effect. So we can basically cover that. So if the low protein diet group and the one supplement with leucine, because they're both deficient in protein, if insulin is playing the key role, then they should have similar results. Because there's not enough additional protein there to help with the protein synthesis. If the view is that you need more protein and that insulin is playing a bigger role than leucine. So it's the arguments that people put out there. So that's what we're looking at. So fractional protein synthesis rates and translation initiation control mechanisms were examined in skeletal muscle and visceral tissue 90 minutes after feeding. So they checked this. I'm not going to read all the remainder because it's part of the diagram, so we don't end up, if people want to read these sort of studies, they can go to their heart's content. I'm just going to show the key information, the images. Okay, let's look at the first table. So first table, we've got the low protein with leucine, and high protein. Okay. They're isocaloric in terms of energy, 13.7, 13.7, 13.7. Okay, that's clear. They're using whey protein. That comes in much faster. And the other thing is it also has an effect on insulin as well, which is another good thing, because I like things that actually are going to activate that part, because if it's not leucine and it's insulin, well, the low protein and the low protein leucine group should actually have the similar results. Just because of leucine, since you've got a similar level, you'll get a similar, you should get similar response, because that's the argument that basically, whey has a double effect on insulin than glucose itself. So if you eat a potato, for instance, it has half the insulin effect that basically that whey has. So if you're having a very poor amount of protein, a very poor amount of whey protein, then you're going to have a much really low insulin response. It's going to be very anemic. And that's good, because basically what we're arguing here, well, if it's anemic, the two groups should be the same, because there's not enough protein in there. Because the argument is you need more protein. Leucine sort of signals more than actually drives it. I believe it drives it, but these are the different arguments that people put out there. Okay, obviously you want to be eating leucine with a lot of protein, because that's going to drive it. That's going to give you even better results. We'll see that information anyway. So they're both using the same amount of skim milk, so same amount of lactose, the fat, which is down here. Oops, wrong way. 10.5, and the fats are going to be different because the proteins are swapped. More protein, less fat, because they have to be isocaloric. So these two groups are going to have more fat, and this one, the high protein one, is going to have less fat. The water content is different, as you can see. That's because, again, fat has more hydration, more water compared to protein. Okay, so the vitamins are identical. The trace minerals are identical. The gum, which is another thing, I don't know why. Don't ask me, I've got no idea. Calcium and a couple of other things are identical. Okay, so energy identical, protein is different, fat is different, lactose, and here we've got, as you can see, the low protein group has 0.7% leucine. That's from the whey, the 1.85 amount. And that must be in grams or something like that, I suspect. Or it's yeah. Where's it got it? It's in this sort of whatever this Hillmark ingredients. I should have actually checked that out. Anyway, let's leave it at that. People can go to the Heart's Content and check it out themselves. Now, the last time I read this was about a year ago, and I just forgot all about it. So if people do ask me questions, I'll go back and reread it. But we're just looking at the key findings and stuff like that. I just want to point out, I'm not going to go crazy about it, but every single bloody point and nuance. So as you can see, isocaloric and one had, and the two groups, the low protein leucine, as the abstract said, they had identical amounts of leucine. So obviously this one would have got it from the whey protein. This one would have had additionally supplemented, okay, to get to the same levels. Okay, let's move on. So I'll open up this. So figure 1, as you can see, insulin response. Obviously in the leucine supplemented one, it's slightly higher, and that's pretty much normal, because it's not bound with other proteins. Where it does drop off, but it comes equal about 60 minutes. They're all pretty much the same. The high protein one continues going higher up at about 90 minutes. This one is in the middle, and this one is slightly lower. These are normal responses. The glucose is interesting. The high protein, as I've always said, high protein does not increase blood sugar, as you can see, quite low down here. The one with the low protein keeps on going up, 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 and meets the other one. This one, because of the leucine content, the effects, this jump comes down and probably getting suppressed because of the lower overall by glucagon. So it then eventually comes down and meets the other one at similar levels, because it's the effect of the sugar sort of being pushed much faster. It's an interesting, I'll get into that because there's another study later on and it actually may make more sense to people. Obviously the branched chain amino acids, between the low protein one, as you can see, it doesn't really rise much and it goes down because it's got a very small amount in the bloodstream. The high protein keeps on going up. And this part jumps dramatically in the beginning, comes together and still remains high. And I'll show that in the bars later on. And it's basically because when branched chain amino acids are more tied with other proteins, they work synergistically together. So this is there's less other aminos to work with. So this is the reason why you end up with more in the bloodstream. So, and it's another reason why I believe in whole foods. Adding a branched chain amino acid just elevates the amount in your bloodstream, but doesn't really do much else, in that regard. Yes, it probably helps to some extent, because the argument here, it does help to some extent, but it doesn't have, but you can just still get, by having foods rich in leucine, which is animal foods, have a good amount anyway, and it's a more prolonged, because this is over 90 minutes. Remember, I've talked before that with whey, you can get a small amount because it's a rapid sort of protein synthesis within 90 minutes, then it drops off, where with real food, it can actually, because of this, your peristalsis slowing down, it can actually happen over very many hours and get far more in the end. So there's much more advantage in that. You could still spike it every couple of hours with supplements, supplemental protein, stuff like that, high deuterium shit. But not something that I would recommend. Better real food. Anyway, let's move on. So this is figure 2, which we're looking at this is the plasma amino acids, the essential ones. And again, as you can see, because of the lower protein content of the low protein leucine, you've got, remember we saw that exaggeration in the bloodstream, much higher. Well, less of it's being utilized with the other muscles, with the other proteins, working with the other proteins synergistically. So you end up with more in the bloodstream. And obviously you'll get lower muscle protein synthesis because there's less of the material as well. I'm talking about here, just trying to show that it drives it, but how high it drives it depends also on the material that it's got to use. And that's why more of it ends up in the bloodstream for that reason, just to clarify, this nuanced sort of part. As you can see, all the other ones are pretty similar between the low protein ones, and the ones which are high protein are much higher, all the other essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids. Anyway, move on. So this part of the animal is the back part. So as we can see in the back part, this is the low protein. This is low protein leucine, the second group. So just remember that. So as you can see, the muscle protein synthesis is much higher due to leucine. Much higher. See here? So it's much closer to that when it comes to the back part, much closer to the high protein. Again here, in protein efficiency, not only synthesis, but also the efficiency is fairly good as well. So if leucine wasn't driving it, they should have been down here. These two, very similar. But even though there's not a, look here, how close are they? It's somewhere in the middle or close to, compared to, there's here way more gap compared to here, which quite clearly shows you that there is much more protein synthesis happening due to leucine in the back area. Okay, those are the key things, as you can see: mTOR activation, low protein, no leucine, leucine, low protein, and high protein. mTOR activation, similar. Leucine is driving. You need mTOR. Remember I showed you earlier, for muscle protein synthesis. There they are. It's actually slightly even higher, but more or less the same. That could be just statistical noise. They're more or less the same, which shows quite clearly you want to activate mTOR to drive muscle protein synthesis. Leucine. It's not insulin. These ones are the same makeup. They have the same insulin response based on the sugar and lower protein. But you know what? Look at the difference. Massive difference between mTOR activation, which is important for muscle protein synthesis. Anyway, let's go further here. Try to remember these ones. I can't remember. I think it's the back part of the leg, I think. Anyway, so as you can see, again, those differences. That is the actual master, the jaw area. Again, see, foods high in leucine will mean you've got a better jaw. Low in leucine, think plant-based, think vegan, you've got a weaker jaw and a narrowing face. Not good. You've got that vegan look. We don't want the little piglets having the vegan look. Not very good. When it comes to the left heart, there's no difference between the two leucine groups, whether it's high or low protein, no difference whatsoever. Atrophy of heart with low protein. So leucine protects the heart as well from atrophying. Very important. Vegans, you will have poor heart function. Yes, you'll have atrophy. Not a good thing. Not a good thing at all. Okay, now let's look at the other parts. Obviously, this is one that I've talked about all the time, the jejunum, which is the second part of the small intestine. I've spoken about, how bile salts, the second part get recycled back through the jejunum. Anyway, so as you can see, protein synthesis in terms of your gut. So think in terms, I need good levels of protein to basically maintain, because remember, your gut is made of collagen. You need leucine to maintain a good gut. Low leucine, you end up with poor guts, leaky guts and stuff like that. Not a good thing. No. Obviously, you need other things like, vitamin D and other nutrients, but at the same time, leucine is playing a role here as well. We shouldn't think reductionist, even though sometimes I point this out. That would be very reductionist of me of just saying, oh, it's leucine. No, it's not. It's a lot of things synergistically working together. But leucine plays an important role in gut integrity and gut maintenance, so that's very important. So you can see again, those poor vegans with their poor gut problems, lack of leucine, eat your meat. So kidneys, even here, there's a difference. It's not massive. Pancreas, quite a big difference. And we know pancreas is very important for proper functioning. If you get atrophy of the pancreas or non-functional, or pancreas is not working very well like that, that can be a problem, very important for a whole lot of, regulatory hormones like insulin and glucagon. So, and insulin resistance and all sorts of other things. You need good functioning pancreas, not atrophying and falling apart. Liver, not much difference, pretty much. And that's quite clear because the liver is slightly different in the way it's structured. So let's move on. I'm not going to look at that sort of stuff. That's pretty much, the study goes on for ages, and that was the last part. Now, let's look at this one, which just goes, leucine is an essential amino acid that can directly activate the mechanistic target of ribomyosin complex 1. And that's what we see, a signaling pathway in skeletal muscle, thereby simulating translation initiation of protein synthesis. Yes, always has been leucine, just to make that point. Now, let's look at this group. This is protein leucine content is a determinant of shorter or longer term muscle protein synthesis response at rest and following. So people sitting on their asses or following resistance exercise in healthy older women, a randomized controlled trial. So this is actually a randomized controlled trial, not in deranged, unhealthy people, but in healthy women. So, which is good. So basically they've done biopsies as well. They took biopsies at the beginning and biopsies at the end, which is good. So, so salival, the supplement, all this sort of stuff, that was actually done. Everything was measured, blood drawn right through. Muscle biopsies were also done. So all that was pretty much covered. I won't go into it any further. As you can see here, they're looking at two groups, leucine and control. They had a control group and a leucine group. Okay, the amount, isocaloric, same calories. The total protein was the same in this case. So as you can see, they've given them very similar amino acids, similar levels of calcium, vitamin D, carbohydrate, saturated fat. So everything's pretty much the same in fats, carbs, calcium, vitamin D, and also all the other amino acids. Okay, the only difference is one group got the control got 0 of the leucine. That's the inherited. So you inherit from the food. They can't remove it completely. Is 1 point. The control had a bit more as 1.3 compared to this group, which is the leucine group, had slightly less of what it got from the pool of amino, what they gave them food. But on top of that, they added 3.1 grams. So we know that you need between 3 to 4 grams to get muscle protein synthesis. This group is sub 1.3. This one combined is 4.2. Okay, so just to cover the two groups. Yep, this is the stuff. Yep. To always remember, some of them are different the way they open up. As you can see, fasted, no difference. Fed rest, that means sitting on your ass, no exercise. Look at the difference. The leucine group, same amount of protein. Oh, for fuck's sake. Same amount of protein. We know the two groups got the same amount of protein. Okay. Look at leucine. Same amount of fat, same amount of sugar, same amount of everything. It's just the leucine difference. And if you exercise, you even get a bigger result. You get very little. It's quite compressed, very little if you're fed exercise, fed rest, sitting on your ass. Even sitting on your fucking ass, you will get more muscle protein synthesis. Many people have seen this, that have gone onto a carnivore diet, don't exercise, and build muscle and go, what the fuck's going on? You can thank leucine for that. And that's what this study is showing. Okay, yep, we don't need that. Next one. So here's again. We're seeing similar results. Baseline, at rest, at exercise. Okay, you're getting the picture, and then they have a discussion piece. So we'll move on. Leucine supplementation enhances integrated myofibril protein synthesis in free-living older men consuming lower and higher protein diets, a parallel group crossover study. So they actually did a crossover for these guys. So they basically did the different ones, a washout, and then a crossover where they switched them even better as a crossover randomized control study. Pretty good, this one. And and basically, just to give you an idea what this myofibril is, it's, this is one of the biggest problems that a lot of people who don't get enough leucine or protein, because that's where they're going to get the leucine from animal foods, which are very high. Plant-based stuff is very low in leucine, so it's not going to drive muscle protein synthesis. Piss poor. Most of it will, end up in the bowl or sugar. So myofibril myopathy is part of a group of disorders called muscular dystrophies. The affects muscle function and causes weakness. So, some cases the heart, cardiac muscle is also affected. So these are problems, and a lot of people are getting sarcopenic and a lot of issues. Now, these myofibril, what they are is, Bart's talked about them. All those, the cones, those that actually come together, the actual, those parts, those fibers, those muscle fibers. That's what we're talking about, those muscle fibers, So your muscle has all these muscle fibers. Those filament groups go in and out. Well, this is the sort of stuff we're talking about that is enhanced with leucine. So better muscle, density, better muscle function and all that is really dependent on leucine. Let's go back to this study before I waffle too much and bore the living daylights out of people. Anyway, so again, we're looking at the two groups. We've got the leucine group and the placebo. And remember, they crossed them over. So these are the averages of the crossover. So switching back and forward. So here, they really went out of their way to make sure that they eliminated. So they had, in terms of, total energy, this identical, isocaloric, carbohydrates, identical, when you're looking at the fats, identical. And, they pretty much, so citric acid was identical, same amount of stevia, some flavoring. I don't know why they put that in there. Sucrose, maltodextrin, same, And here they did something really interesting. The placebo group got alanine and glycine, which was eliminated from this group. So these people were given this sort of preparation, and they were given, and this group was given leucine. So pretty much these people were just given these amino acids that people tend to basically say alanine and glycine are really, you see them when in muscle protein synthesis, and they excluded those from this group. So it's really interesting what they've actually done. They've really made it leucine and eliminating some of the other amino acids. So let's see what happens when they do that. I'm not going to, these are the sort of things different people can read it as they like. They're looking at the breakfast period and all that and the different effects, but I'm not really interested in that sort of, because that's the blood glucose, plasma glucose and all these other things, you know, the different concentration of different things in the bloodstream doesn't interest me. I want to know what the muscle protein synthesis, like all of us, is doing. Okay, so let's open this up. I will have to increase that. So at rest, as you can see, that's the low protein. That's the higher protein. So you can actually see there is a slight increase. But they took out certain types of aminos that seem to have a bit of an effect as well. So there's a bigger magnitude of effect. Here it's narrower, you know, so there are differences in the two group. So the low protein in that one, you can see with the leucine thrown in, again, low protein, high protein. See the leucine effect? There's your leucine effect. So whether you're at high protein or low protein, do you see with the low protein, it's more narrower, but still, you know, there they are. Okay. There's the placebo groups. The high protein did better in the placebo. But when you actually have leucine in either one of the groups, it does much better. So leucine always comes out on top. Always. Again, here, the same thing. The leucine factor is going to be higher, whether it's low protein or high protein. You know, again, here in this sort of situation, the same thing. We're getting the same damn result. It's not the protein, it's the leucine, you know, because basically if it was the protein, that should have been equal to that. That should have been equal to that. These two shouldn't have been equal. Those two shouldn't have been equal, the leucine groups. You know, because what I've been told, you need high amounts of protein, you know, because you get it because of the higher amount of protein as well, you're getting a more insulin effect as well. So if it was, again, that was the argument. That's why they say add sugar to enhance the insulin effect. But you don't need it. As you can see, low protein, high protein, leucine, high. Placebo, yes, the without leucine, the high protein does better than basically the low protein, but just marginally better. It does not. It's actually still the high protein is still lower than the high leucine low protein. So leucine wins over high protein if that high protein has no leucine in it. Get it? Is it getting through? Now, the final part, the one that nails this bloody argument. I left the best for last. Ah, yes. Okay. This is back. I don't know why people have missed this one. The effects of starvation on the turnover and metabolic response of leucine. Basically, fasting and infusing leucine. Got it? Yes, pass this on to your bodybuilding mates and tell them they're a bunch of wankers that think carbs are required. It's leucine. Eat your fucking meat high in leucine. Anyway, leucine was administered as a primed, continuous 3 to 4 hour infusion in non-obese and obese subjects in post-abortive states, and for 12 hours in the obese subjects after 3 days and 4-week fasts. Anyway, let's move on. So I'm just going to go to the conclusion. People can go away and read the study themselves. Infusion of exogenous leucine in prolonged fasting results in a decline in plasma levels of other amino acids. So the infusion of exogenous, outside, leucine in prolonged fasting results in a decline in plasma levels of other amino acids. You know, when you're actually fasted, you basically, autophagy is turning over, you know, and remember, glucagon is very high, insulin is low. So remember the insulin to glucagon, 0.8, which insulin is suppressed, glucagon is much higher. And when glucagon is much higher, also blood sugar is demand driven, but we'll go into that. Now, here, these are in fasted states. They're actually infusing, the leucine in there, okay? And what's happening, as remember, I told you about the pulsatile effect of fasting. You know, you get this rise, you get this situation where autophagy rises, and then as it releases, all the old organelles from the inside the cell and all the other crap and all that, and releases all that into the bloodstream, there's a whole lot of amino acids that are actually released, rush into the bloodstream. What that does is it inhibits immediately, because it immediately has a releasing effect on the actual, on basically autophagy, because more protein is coming in, and you have this pulsatile effect, and that protein is utilized by the body to create new cells, new tissue. Okay, so we know this pulsatile effect that happens when you're fasted. You're not always in autophagy, you're in this pulsatile effect. Okay, what leucine is doing is actually clearing that out much faster. So it's actually taking those materials and turning them into new tissue much faster. So it's enhancing the muscle protein synthesis, and possibly, getting you back into an autophagy sort of state. Could be a biohack, to enhance autophagy and enhance muscle protein synthesis at the same time. Okay, so improvements. I don't have a study to prove that. That's just a hypothesis, something that came into my head, but a possibility. But I can't show it mechanistically. There's no study out there that I was able to find in that regard. I've been hunting for one, I can tell you, but I haven't found anything. If anybody does come across, please let me know. Improvements in nitrogen balance and unchanged so you had improvements in nitrogen balance, obviously, because those aminos are actually being cleared out much faster. Unchanged excretion of 3-methylhistidine, thus suggesting simulation. So you haven't got an increase in this, because what they do is the 3-methylhistidine, they actually see that when you're actually fasting, they see that in your urine. That was unchanged, the excretion, thus suggesting simulation of muscle protein synthesis. Got it? So when you throw leucine in while you're fasting, you will enhance muscle protein synthesis, and you won't waste away muscle. Got it? Okay, so that could be a bit of a biohack, but you'd have to get a supplement just with leucine, because you don't want some of the other stuff like a branched chain amino acid. No, just leucine, because we don't want the effect affecting insulin. We want insulin suppressed by glucagon. So basically we get the autophagy benefit and the muscle protein synthesis benefit, okay, in the pulsatile effect stages. Remember? So you want Autophagy, muscle protein synthesis, autophagy, muscle protein synthesis, autophagy, muscle protein synthesis is what I'm trying to say. Leucine infusion also reduces glucose production and to an even greater extent, glucose consumption, thereby raising blood glucose concentrations. That would be through the effect of glucagon. So if insulin was there, that wouldn't be happening. The rise in plasma leucine in early starvation results primarily from a decrease in leucine clearance. So the clearance of leucine is not happening, which drops progressively during starvation. So normally, the rise in plasma is in early starvation results in, when people say you go into initial fast and you lose a bit of, muscle potentially, and then it's sort of, you get muscle sparing. Well, normally you would see an increase, the rise in that, and you in normal state, and then that would drop off progressively during a fast, starvation, they call it. That's how they look. It's just the terms that they used back then, that's the terms. I don't like that term, but that's what they used. Cahill used the same term, because they didn't have a term for ketosis, deep ketosis when you're fasting. That's not starvation. It's basically a fasted state. Anyway, we're not going to go there. But basically, as you can see, we've got an enhancement of muscle protein synthesis, even in a low insulin state, being fasted. Got it? Is this getting through to people? So if your bodybuilder mates think that they are smarter by infusing insulin and causing themselves endocrine problems and, a lot of adiposity, what we call the modern day bodybuilder, muscular fat, if they, and then they basically purge themselves like mad, very bad for the body to do these extreme cuts, these purging effects. Just eat your meat, that additional leucine, and drive muscle protein synthesis the natural way. Don't fucking play around with insulin. Because as I've shown, even in rest, leucine will drive muscle protein synthesis. It will get enhanced with exercise, obviously. I'm not saying be a couch potato and you're going to basically build big muscles, but you'll still build more than somebody that is eating a whole lot of carbs. Simple as that. So I hope this was insightful to some people, probably annoying to others who hold, different opinions and views. But I would say that if leucine was not playing the role and insulin was the key thing that was required to infuse insulin for anabolism, then what should be happening is we shouldn't be seeing these effects. If insulin is required to basically drive muscle protein synthesis, well, we shouldn't be seeing these effects in a fasted state. It shouldn't be happening, but it is. And we don't see excretions, and we know that it's being utilized to create new muscle. That's why. So I hope you enjoyed this. There's only one other point that I probably should make. There, can you please sort of share this around amongst your bodybuilding mates so they can get a bit of an insight into what really drives muscle protein synthesis, so they can basically realize that real foods like steak and eggs, the old diets that the old bodybuilders used to do, steak and eggs, will basically keep you ripped and muscular and also insulin sensitive and healthier. Like the old bodybuilders, they lived into, one guy, remember I talked about him, 90, he died at 98. He lived to 93 on his higher meat, lifting weights and all that. And somebody convinced him at that age to basically, at 95, somebody convinced him at 95 to basically give all that up And for 3 years, he got into a very catabolic type, marathons and stuff like that, and cut back on his meat. And he thought he was being healthier. He lived to 95 in a very healthy by doing meat and weightlifting. Why would you give that up? But he did. And 3 years later, he was dead. So, but the current bodybuilders are doing it all wrong. They are actually putting a lot of crap into their bodies. They're injecting themselves with all sorts of crap, and they are harming themselves. They're causing themselves long-term harm, and they're dying young in their 30s and 40s when they don't need to, because leucine is what is driving. Eat more protein, add a bit more leucine, and you will drive more muscle protein synthesis. And if you exercise more, yep, that will help. Even for the studies showed that somebody at rest compared to somebody exercising is going to get more muscle protein synthesis. We know that. The literature, bodybuilders for years have known that, exercise will enhance. But the leucine is what is driving muscle protein synthesis, not insulin. You have to understand that insulin basically is a signaling. Glucagon and insulin are playing signaling roles. One is telling the body, create more glucose, demand driven. One is telling, let's allow hormone-sensitive lipase to release more fatty acids to be oxidized. That's what they're doing. They're signaling. And when they get deranged because of too much, like your blockades of the receptors, adding more insulin is not clearing out, it doesn't clear out basically the sugars, because you've got the blockade because of the Randall cycle. The reality is these are signaling stuff and can be deranged and then cause all sorts of signaling problems. So yes, but you don't need a lot of insulin. You just need the signaling effect of insulin. You don't need insulin itself. It's leucine that's driving it. They've got it back to front. So, that's the take-home message. Eat your bloody meat and build healthy tissue, because that's what's going to make the difference. With my dad, I sort of, he's nearly 87 now. He'll be in January. He basically, mid-70s, he was basically sarcopenic. He had lost a lot of muscle mass, and I suspect bone density as well. And what I did to reverse that is looked at this sort of literature. I've been sitting on this for some time. I wanted to make this video, but it's been it should have happened earlier. And basically Dad did a couple of things. One, I made sure I gave him for a period of time. At the time, I gave him a branched chain amino acid. I could have basically used a leucine supplement, not a beast branched chain amino acid. The reason why I gave him that was because it added some additional aminos, important aminos. And the reason is because I was struggling to get Dad to eat more meat. And a lot of people find they've got older members in the family that are really hesitant to eat more meat. And I found Dad was hesitant. Now he eats quite a bit of meat, and we don't supplement that anymore. I don't bother because he's getting enough leucine from the diet. The only thing I supplement is taurine, and that's because the biosynthesis goes down, and I want to use the taurine's role. It's got multiple roles. I've discussed it before, but it also has a role in basically as an amino transporter. So I want more aminos coming in, and then the leucine content to drive that muscle protein synthesis to enhance. And his muscles have come back, and he's really strong for his age, as his doctor has testified. He's got a lot of strength. When they do that grip test, for his age group, he basically has the strength of somebody in their 60s rather than their 80s. So he's really rapidly turned things around, which is great in that regard. So the take-home message, if you've got older people in your family, this is not meant to be medical advice. This is my own experience with Dad. All I can say is I would add in there a branched chain amino acid because they are hesitant to consume too much protein. They may be slightly plant-based to some extent or whatever, which is a problem. And the key things that I would add in there would be Definitely choline is an important thing also for muscles and for bones, for bone density. Choline has a role there as well. I would probably end up adding, a gram of choline, a gram of taurine, and a gram of a branched chain amino acid. That's what I would do with these old people. And if I was basically working in a nursing home, I would actually add all three of those to their meals because they are protein deficient meals. So to try and help these people to, one, transport more from the gut in terms of aminos, and two, try to drive that muscle protein synthesis higher and help with the bone and muscle density of these people. It's not perfect, and I'm not saying it's perfect. I would rather these people eat more meat and a species appropriate diet. That's what I recommend. I don't use branched chain amino acids. I don't use supplements because they're high in deuterium. You know me, I argue against these things completely. But if you've got people that are hesitant or resident, problematic, that are just resistant to eating meat because they've been so brainwashed, the easiest way to help those family members is basically giving them those three supplements and trying to slow down their decline, because if they don't get that additional support, their decline will be more rapid. And that's what we've seen. And the reality is that is why our nursing homes are being filled up with a lot of these old people who are becoming senile, demented, and really in a bad state because they're not getting the proper species appropriate nutrition. That's what's happening. And we've seen this explosion. I've discussed it in the other videos and all that. If you take a look, dementia, Alzheimer's, it's exploded from the 70s when we went on to the new food pyramid crap and we reduced the animal foods, increased the plants. It's been a disaster, complete disaster. And as people get older and an aging population is becoming a potential nightmare for families. And so I'm just trying to provide some options for families. It's not perfect. I would, if I could basically have them all in a room and convince them of the importance of eating animal foods, and I could convince them, it'd be a great thing. But I know that, that would be a very hard thing. So all I can say is it's much easier to give them three supplements and say, just add this, you know what I mean? Then and slow down their decline rather than basically see them rapidly decline. I don't have many other options for those sort of people, so that's something that I would do. I've done it with Dad, and slowly I got him to eat more because he felt stronger and all that. And as he moved, and I said, well, Dad, you can get a lot of this stuff from meat. Just eat more meat. And as he ate more meat and we withdrew those supplements, the only thing is taurine now and creatine. That's the other thing for energy. So, and occasionally, initially I did a creatine load with him, and now he just has, 1 gram. I mean, he does a bit of weights in the morning, he does a bit of weights in the afternoon, and he physically moves around all day. So that's all he probably needs. He's not a bodybuilder, So that pretty much those two now, creatine and basically taurine, and the rest he gets from his diet. The rest by eating more meat. So that's the sort of the message I want to leave you guys with. I mean, and I hope this is of help for your family and yourselves. And for those who think that you need insulin, you got it wrong. Leucine is the magic stuff, and that is primarily found in meats. So eat your fucking meat. Anyway, see you guys.